Hi folks. Well look, thank you very much for coming along this morning. Beside me is Justine Mann, former principal most recently of St Cuthbert's and now chair of the Ministerial Advisory Group behind charter schools. I think what we've just seen is an example of what the charter school movement can be. An idea that started in the community, not in the Ministry of Education, to bring kids into a school that's different and engage them differently so that they can feel a sense of pride and purpose that ultimately leads to achievement. This is just one example. We've had in recent months expressions of interest from, for example, a group of people who would like to re-establish St Stephen's School in South Auckland, actually Auckland's oldest school currently in abeyance, to be re-established as a charter, and also a group named AGE, whose dream is to establish a school that specialises in allowing children who are neurodiverse to participate in education. Altogether, the government in this budget will fund 15 new charter schools intended to open at the beginning of 2026. It's also set aside funding for the conversion of 35 state schools who may wish to take on charter status. And the reason that they would like to do that, and again there's been considerable interest from a wide range of state schools already, is that they wish to have the kind of flexibility and autonomy over their funding to be able to employ without rigid union contracts and to be able to chart their own destiny and run their schools their way. That is the aspiration of many in the state sector. But on the flip side, in New Zealand, nothing matters more than how much knowledge we pass from one generation to the next. We're not doing well at that because we don't actually contract for attendance and achievement outcomes. So besides the flexibility of being able to operate their way, charter schools, whether they be new startups or former state schools, will be contracted on a 10-year basis in order that they have the flexibility and the certainty to plan and develop, but are also required under those contracts to reach achievement and attendance goals. That 10-year contract means real certainty for those who are interested. Over the next few months, you'll see legislation introduced to the House and passed by October, and parallel to that you'll see expressions of interest by August or September for people that would like to convert state schools to charters, and shortly after that those who would like to start brand new charter schools ready to be opened at the start of 2026. Obviously starting a new school is a longer process than one that already exists. So that's a very rough overview of what we are planning and what we're announcing today. In total, in budgetary terms, that's $153 million over 4 years, which overwhelmingly will be used to fund the cost of new charter schools. Conversions will have almost no cost to the Crown because largely the exercise is administrative. It just means that the schools will have more autonomy and more accountability when they operate going forward. With that, happy to take any questions. I think if you talk to Rockley Montgomery, the principal, he'd probably tell you things that he's told me in the past, that they've managed, it continues. However, first of all, they couldn't have been established without the charter model. Second of all, there's a number of further constraints, for example, their management structure, their interaction with the ministry, and their union contracts all make it harder to operate than it initially was. Well, certainly that would seem a contradiction if we took your characterisation. The idea that there's a no-holds-bar curriculum is just not a fair assessment of what charter schools will be. They will be required to teach a curriculum that is as good or better than the New Zealand curriculum. And actually that's not unusual. If you look across New Zealand state schools now, we're not far away from Kristen, which teaches the International Baccalaureate. You could go across the bridge to Auckland Grammar, which teaches the Cambridge International Examination. So what I would say is that the government's general thrust is we are going to demand higher standards. Charter schools will be the only schools that actually contract that and say if you don't do it, your funding is at risk and you may ultimately be closed down. So those are currently being worked through in part by Justine and the Ministerial Advisory Group. Those will be in the contracts rather than the legislation. The legislation is largely settled and will be introduced to the House next month. The contracts are still being worked on and that will take several more months. But one thing we do know is that charter schools will be contracted for standards that are necessary to reach the government's overall attendance and achievement goals and probably higher. Sorry. Charter schools will have autonomy, so they won't be forced to do things such as the cell phone ban. But if you look at a school like this, I mean, you aren't seeing any cell phones, and I expect that by and large they will operate the same way. I think it's very unlikely that a school would want to do that. So yes, and the principle is autonomy, but actually you're contracting for academic and achievement outcomes. I think it's going to be very important that they actually teach at least an hour of reading and maths a day. I think it's going to be very important that they have a good classroom environment without the bullying, without the distraction that's leading to trouble elsewhere in the education system. So you could... well, if they want students to show up, I think one of the most, and they need students to show up because they're contracted for them to show up, then they're going to need to create an environment that children would like to come to. In terms of attendance, yes, they were contracted for that. In terms of bullying, of course, that's happened at schools right across New Zealand. I'm not making the claim of perfection. What I'm making the claim is that when you contract for outcomes, you've got a much stronger incentive to achieve them.
Schools that are council maintained, if they're not achieving Ofsted standards, they can also become charter schools, but we will see that happen.
We will see that happen, and there may well be state schools that are not performing that are turned into charter schools. And the question, well, I think the question is who is forced. I'm more interested. So you're thinking about the school. I'm thinking about the community and the students around it. The question is how do we get them a school that's going to get better educational outcomes, not only for those children to flourish, but actually for New Zealand as a whole to flourish. So you can put your emphasis on, the management of a school that is failing its community. I put my emphasis on that community and how do we get them better education. No, what I'd say is the school will continue, but management that aren't actually getting the results that the whole community is depending on them to get might see that we need new management in a particular site. We haven't. I mean, we've budgeted on an average of 200. So if you look at Vanguard, I think they're just under 190 in their current role. So they're relatively small. The average school in New Zealand today is about 350. So you might see initially about 3,000 students, but I would expect them to grow over time. I mean, that's an initial 4-year budget cycle. No, they'll be funded at the same rates as state schools. I can see. No, they'll. I can see you've got your calculator on your iPhone and you're trying to work out what 153 million divided by 4 by 15 schools is. But what you've got to remember is that there's also conversion of 35 state schools. There's also policy work. There's also administration in terms of. The largest amount of it, yes. But yeah. Mm. Well, if that was true, it would be unfair, but it's untrue.
No, even we have 50 schools with 200 students, schools with $15,300 per student, which is more than the number of the state schools.
Sorry, just repeat that again.
At the envelope, and we have 50 charter schools with 200 kids in each. That $153 million.
Oh, look, David, I tell you what, we could play this game. We could. No, it's really not, because the 200 is for the 15 startups. The 35 new ones could be massively larger than that. So again, if we want to get into a detailed discussion, happy to sit down and go through the numbers, but trying to do reckons and calcs on the fly is not going to cut it. Oh, absolutely. Look, the principle here is that a child attending a charter school is funded no more or no less than a child in a similar state school, and it is that simple. So we can do reckons and calcs on our phones on the fly, but I can assure you that is the policy. It's not in my interest for that not to be the policy. Yeah. Yeah.
And the Education Ministry said that last time the charter schools were reporting of their achievements that were financial.
Well, first of all, I don't accept that. You want to make that a broad statement about charter schools. That's completely untrue. About some. Okay, so your story's changed already. The fact is that there was overwhelming success in the previous charter model. The level of reporting was vastly stronger and better than state schools, and in actual fact, this is a model that leads to greater accountability than any other model of school in New Zealand. So, you can find somewhere in the annals of a report that somebody reported something badly. The answer to your question is that we demand high standards. I expect all schools to report, and they face real consequences that no other school would face in that circumstance.
So just adding to
Yeah.
that, I understand that there was some reports that there was some serious financial mismanagement from some schools. What's the guarantee that taxpayers won't be ripped off?
Well, first of all, we close one down. There's no other type of school that faces that sort of consequence. In terms of financial mismanagement, I mean, I hate to say it, but actually, it's happened throughout the education system at various times, but we don't sort of make that a characteristic of the model. If you want to talk about the characteristics of the charter school model, this is the model where schools face real accountability and real consequences for low attendance and low student achievement. That doesn't mean that there isn't people that do bad things in every type of school. There is bullying in every type of school. My point is that with charters, the consequences for low performance are higher, and the mechanisms that the state has to hold them accountable are higher. On the other hand, their freedom to run their business their way is also much stronger.
Staying on the topic of finance, one year recently reported a special school in Auckland with mold and mushrooms growing out of the walls. How can we afford all the money on charter schools when our state schools are so much down?
Well, the money belongs to the students. These students are entitled to an education because they're New Zealand citizens of a certain age. If they want to take their funding entitlement to a charter school, I think they should be allowed to do that. The idea that those students somehow lose their entitlement to state funding because they took it to a charter school, I think is really unfair on those students.
And because there's more funding with the charter schools before, realistically, how many state schools are you looking at converting?
Well, the government has budgeted for up to 35 to convert in Term 1 2025. What will happen in future budgets? That's a 4-year budget cycle, but of course there'll be a budget next year, and I hope that come this time next year there will have been considerable success in the first term of conversions. There'll be considerable interest from state schools wishing to convert, and we'll be standing here or somewhere like it next year talking about a budget for a lot more state schools to convert at the start of 2026. Well, certainly, if you look at the way that we monitor education at the moment, right now, the Ministry of Education does an awful lot of, I guess, management of how the schools are run, but very little on the outcomes. We're flipping that script. We're going to say, here are your accountabilities for achievement and attendance, but also here's your money, and how you run your school is up to you. Well, I think I don't see us putting those sorts of input stipulations on how the school is run, but I also believe that if you want to achieve the targets which you're accountable for, then it'd be pretty crazy not to be doing at least an hour of maths and reading each day. I think the philosophy is different. We're talking about being really tight on the outputs, the achievement and the attendance. But also giving autonomy to the schools, to run themselves their way. I think you've got to have either accountability for outputs, or you've got to manage the inputs. They're both valid. Not to the extent that they can be shut down for failing at their contract. So, look, I mean, there's an open debate, and I don't claim any wisdom on this one way or the other, but there's taxpayer money involved, so it can't be a free-for-all. There's got to be some accountability. You either manage the inputs, which some education systems around the world do, or you demand the outputs. Now, in charter schools, it's a very pure form of saying, these are the outputs that we want, but in return, you get some real autonomy. And I think the reason for doing that is often the best ideas for getting kids engaged in learning and feeling good about themselves don't come from Wellington. If this school had been made as a proposal to the Ministry of Education without the charter model, it would have been laughed out of the room. And yet, I've been coming here for 10 years and seen thousands of students where it really has changed their lives. Well, of course, in theory they could do that, but I just make the point that a few things are different this time. One is that the debate has kind of been had, and there's a little bit of, you don't know what you got till it's gone. As soon as charter schools were gone, all of a sudden, many people missed them quite a lot. The debate is maturing. Second of all, as you can see, there's going to be a lot more of them, and a much more diverse range of schools from right across all of our communities. So I think it's going to be a lot less likely that an incoming government would want to do that. Second of all, previously the contracts were 6 years, and so it wasn't difficult for an incoming government to say, well, at some point in the next 6 years you're going to need to recontract, and we might not do that, so why don't you close now, which was effectively the message schools got like this towards the end of 2017. I understand where you're coming from on that. I think, first of all, we're not actually creating more people. The people that would have been doing this work will be doing the work in a different structure. Why would you like a different structure? Why would we like a different structure? Or maybe you would, I don't know, but why would we like a different structure? Basically because we believe that this is a very specific kaupapa which requires a group of people who are there for that purpose. And I would say it's not dissimilar to the debate around Oranga Tamariki, or what was then the Ministry of Vulnerable Children. The thought was, can this special work be done while it's still a part of the MSD? I was one of the people who argued at the time it needed to be separate. Now, whatever challenges OT may face, imagine if it was a subset of the Ministry of Social Development. I think that would be all the harder. Well, again, I'm not aware of who those staff are or what the purpose was. Ultimately, the government doesn't manage the Ministry of Education at that level. We simply say this is the budget that the Ministry has to work with, and these are the jobs that we'd like them to do. If the Secretary of Education has decided to do that, then I hope she's got a good reason for it. Well, I was just thinking about well, once again, I would ask you, what is the total number of people working and what is the total outgoing of taxpayer money involved? And I suspect what you'll find is that this is a storm in a teacup. The big picture is a significant net increase in the full-time equivalents, whether they be employees or contractors, a reduction in the amount of activity and a reduction in the amount of expenditure, all of which means we're... Well, I would if that was what was happening, but I think we can get a bit carried away with speculation here. Well, strictly speaking, that's actually the Minister of Education's role, because I don't manage the ministry. Well, I don't have any vested interest. Look, in all seriousness, the delegation means that it's actually the Minister of Education who's responsible for the Secretary and the operation of the ministry. Nonetheless, I think it's fair to say that within a coalition government there might be some questions about this here. Oh, I think so, yeah. Sorry, yes. Oh, yes, yes. About 35, I think. But, I think they've come to us in confidence, but yeah, there's a lot. I think people will be impressed. You can use that phrase if you like, yeah. Again, issues around how the property will operate is actually policy work that's been done right now, but certainly they will have a role as tenants, I would describe it, and the property that the Crown owns will remain in Crown ownership. I mean, we're not giving that away, I can assure you. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, charter schools will be accountable for the attendance and the achievement of the students. They're not going to be accountable to the whims of political change as they were last time.
So when the biggest that had an actual chance to show you what a large. Is that how long you expect them to really be done?
I think just as a matter of research methodology, I mean, if you're a high school, it takes 5 years for a student to go all the way through. So, after 10 years, you've had 5 years worth of students go all the way through, and you can actually evaluate how few of them end up 2 years later. So, yeah, you could make that argument, but we'll have data much, much sooner than that as well, where we'll be able to see things like attendance and achievement, year by year. They should just be honest. They should just come out and say, we don't like charter schools because teachers in charter schools don't have to use union contracts and don't have to pay a % of their salary to the union in Wellington. They should just be honest. They should just come out and say, the reason we don't like charter schools is that it's an existential threat to our model where we collect a % of our members' salaries and sit in Wellington and try and meddle in education policy. Be honest, that's what I'd say to them. Well, again, this actually happens quite frequently. I mean, students move around the city, students move from school to school. The question is, are they getting better choices and options to go to? Ultimately, if students leave a school, that school has a choice, either get better or go home. It's that simple. And at the moment, my priority is always on, does each of these students have a choice that they can go to a place where they can build skills that can lead to qualifications, ultimately allow them to feel good about themselves. That's the goal here. If that means that the school that they used to be at and weren't happy at, or perhaps actually weren't attending while that state school was collecting the money owed to that student's education, then that's a problem for that school, but I'm much more focused on that student. That will depend on the EQI level. Each one will have an EQI number, so potentially, but we haven't worked through that yet. It does actually vary quite a lot. I wish there was one number, but there's first of all different ages of students. Second of all, it can vary around the location and the size of the school. So, well, basically you look at an area, a number anywhere from about 10 to about 15,000. Once you bear in mind that a state school doesn't get that much operating funding, they're not close, but what they do get is capital charge and depreciation on a whole lot of land and buildings, which in this case they're paying a commercial landlord for. So once you work that out, yeah. But it is roughly the same. I mean, look, the other way you can look at it, primary and secondary education, I think about 12 billion, there's about 800,000 kids there, so that's 15 grand. So, all right.
And Minister, what do you see sorry, change the topic a little bit, but what do you see the Waitangi Tribunal playing a role for?
Look, there's a very important settlement to be done. Up north with Ngāpuhi, it's the most complex, it's the most difficult, and it's taken the longest. I think the most important thing the Waitangi Tribunal can do going forward is assist in making a settlement with Northland. You know, I'm from Northland, I'm from Ngāpuhi, I know how much difference it would make to have a settlement up there, but it would seem that the Waitangi Tribunal is determined almost to set itself up as a kind of House of Lords instead of helping heal some of the grievances of our past. Well, I want to see it settle. I mean, I have a conflict of interest here, but I'd like to see it settle with Ngāti Rehia first. You know, I think ultimately there's a serious question of what is the purpose of the Waitangi Tribunal once every hapu in New Zealand has settled. And I think that question needs to be openly debated. I think one thing that we need more of in New Zealand is some open debate about some things. Yeah. Sorry. Look, I respect the court and their findings. What I would say is that what's more important is that Section 7AA will be repealed. The legislation was introduced to Parliament yesterday, and we're going to have Oranga Tamariki focus on the welfare of each kid rather than their race. Well, you know, the Parliament was elected by about 3 million voters. I mean, it's a bit mean to accuse that of being sneaky. Well, if it was, that would be up to the Attorney General and the Cabinet. I don't really know, because you have to know, you know, what are the likelihood of success, what would be the points that you'd appeal on, and I'm not engaged with that level of legal detail, so I couldn't really give you a good answer. Not really, because we now carry on and we're making the change that will affect the children. Alrighty, folks, look, I really appreciate you all coming along, and hopefully we'll have many more charter stories as time goes on. Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, you can ask. No.
So the Ministry Advisory Group, or the Establishment Board, is working with the Ministry so that we can give the government detail on the criteria for charter schools and advice on the contracts as well. So basically we're looking at the mechanisms by which we hold charter schools to account. Absolutely, absolutely. The idea is that charter schools prepare young people so that they can make choices once they leave school. They can go on to tertiary or training of any kind, and they can flourish as citizens in New Zealand. So obviously there's flexibility by which they reach that goal, but there has to be huge accountability to make sure that they're prepared to actually live the lives they want to and function and flourish as citizens.
This time around, will we see the wider spread across the country of county schools, or is it still being specialised?
Yes, we hope so.
Yeah, and in fairness, I mean, if you look at where, sorry, I'll just have a
absolutely.
little bit of mic space. If you look at the schools that were established, I mean, in fairness, we had one in Hawke's Bay, we had one in Hamilton, but we also, at the time that the government changed, had applications in play for Christchurch, Gisborne, Taupo. Remember, we had two in Whangarei, so they were a bit more spread than. And I think we had one in Porirua, if I remember rightly. So. Yeah,
Yes.
no, they are.
Yes.
They're much more. We're all focused on diversity, including geographic. Anyway, sorry, Justine.
No,
I'll
no,
give you
no,
your
not
mic
at all.
space back. Cool. All righty. Hey, well, look, thank you very much, folks. We'll catch you.